What's going on, Tamers? It's me, 8th place Red Hybrid guy. For folks who don't know what I'm talking about, over the past weekend, I entered a 3v3 team event for Digimon with a couple friends of mine, and we ended up getting 8th place out of about 27, 28 teams. I put out a ton of information and did an entire write-up on my deck, as well as the tournament report about how me and my team did. So if you want to check that out, take a look at my Twitter where I have entire threads on all that information. As my first actual 3v3 tournament experience for Digimon, I gotta say, that event was spectacular. It was a ton of fun, it was really competitive, there were tons of side events if you didn't win or didn't get top 8. To actually play in, and there was tons of giveaways that they had over the course of the event. What makes it even more spectacular was that it was a complete passion project put on by the fans. So no official involvement from Bandai. The fans put together everything, the advertisement, the prizing, everything. It was just such a great experience. But that is exactly why this video is late. The Japanese meta report was not being done because I was participating in a tournament instead of editing videos. So like I said before, we are in our 13th week of the VS Royal Knights meta over here in Japan. And while the new starter decks that do feature some of the ace cards as well as some new black and purple cards have been released, the results we're going to take a look at this week don't have that information. Those will be from next week going forward. But for this week's events, we do have a good sample size of data to pull from, as well as a large 3v3 tournament. Not the one that I entered, by the way, different one. But outside of that, let's take a look at some of the decks that topped over the course of the last week, a few key takeaways, as well as a closer look at some of those decks. So actually hopping into the results, we see for the third week again, Mirage Galgamon is performing excellently. Again, with the addition of the new training cards, as well as some optimizations in deck building, this deck has seen a ton of success. It's been at the top of its game the past couple weeks. In the hunt for the most optimized build for Mirage Galgamon, there seems to be a split based on the inclusion of the Petrov Tamer, which gives your Digimon jamming for the turn. Now, some players want to use this card because it does ensure that your low-level Mirage Galgamons or Galgamons are going to live whenever they attack. However, some people feel that this card doesn't synergize well enough with the Mirage Galgamon burst mode, and for that reason have cut it entirely in favor of either more mental trainings or more copies of the Thomas Tamer. Of course, the Thomas Tamer more useful in this case for the level 7 for the deck, being able to allow you to swing multiple times. And so you can see the difference in building strategies here, where the Petrov Tamer allows you to get jamming and do a little bit more chip damage in the early game. The Mirage Galgamon burst mode plus the Thomas Tamer allows you to make those one-turn finishes with multiple attacks. And then dropping down the list, we're going to see some old favorites from BT13, including things like Shinebrid as well as Beelzemon. After that restricted list announcement we got last week, though, I don't know how long Beelzemon is going to stay in this position. And then going further down the list, things like Blue Flare always strong. Chaosdramon and Mugindramon still doing well. I think after playing this deck, I maybe took it for granted. I didn't think it was going to be this strong, but even last weekend when I was playing in events, I saw tons of Chaosdramon and Mugindramon running around. And it seems like Mirage Galgamon, this deck now has two kinds of builds that people are going for. Either a black-centric build for the lower level Digimon, where you're trying to be on board and then evo into your level 6s, or there's also a red variant that's been popping up, which really turbos out the card draw and lets you get your pieces very quickly. If you're interested in that red variant of the deck, then keep watching because we're going to take a look at one of those a little bit later. And then moving along, we also have some of the mainstays like Belphemon as well as Bloom Quartz. Now, I gotta admit, I was wrong. I think that at the beginning of this set, Rosemon and Rosemon Burstman were going to take over as the face of green, but that's not been the case at all. It feels like in the past couple weeks, folks have just retreated back to Bloom Quartz, and it's been doing fantastically. It has a great matchup against Blue Flare especially. It's unfortunate this deck did get hit in the recent restricted list announcement that we got last week, but I'm interested to see what this deck gets in BT14 to bring it up to par. And then rounding out the rookie level here with things like Gallantmon as well as Jessmon popping up again and some Wargreymon in the mix. As we drop down to the in-training level here, things like Aegershamon are showing up again as well as Alphamon. Got an Alter SB out there somehow. I'm not sure what that's about. Also, Beelstar players cannot keep these people down no matter what I try. Dark Knight as well as Hunters. Kazuchimon has popped up again. It feels like people are experimenting a little bit with Kazuchimon. We talked about the deck in previous videos, so if you want to take a look at that deck list, definitely check some of those out within the past 2 or 3 weeks. Things like Mastemon and Ophanimon are there, as well as Ravemon. Also, Royal Knights still strong as always. While we haven't seen much of this deck recently because it doesn't take advantage of some of the training cards, still a very strong deck in its own right. Actually, one of my teammates used this deck last week in our 3v3 tournament, and they actually had the best record out of all 3 of us. So yeah, still a strong deck here, Royal Knights. And then things like Sakyamon, as well as some Vmon armor. There's a really cool Shine hybrid deck that popped up last week, and we're definitely going to take a look at this one because I think it does combine some really interesting elements of the recovery mechanics of Yellow, as well as the destruction ability of the Shine cards that came out in BT13, so keep your eyes peeled for this. And the last deck on this list here going to be Crossheart. What's really cool about this list specifically is that it uses the Merva build, which also takes advantage of cards like Gravity Press and Blinding Ray, which I talked about in a previous video, so if you haven't taken a look at that, please check it out. In the early game, they use the base Crossheart engine to get chip damage off, and then to close out the game, they gain a ton of memory on a single turn, and then they use Mervamon to get those final 3 swings. So let's take a closer look at some of those decks that topped last week, and the first one we're going to look at is going to be that red variant on the Machine Dramon / Chaos Dramon deck that I talked about before. Now you see at the lower levels, this deck is already pretty red focused with the Gigimons as the Digitama as well as the Gidomons here. The combination of this Gigimon and the Gidomon gives you a ton of card draw in the early game. For folks who don't know, this is the promo Gidomon who allows you to draw a card whenever you attack. So you can kind of waste this guy to just get some chip damage off early on and also get a lot of card draw off of that as well. We also see the preference for drawing in some of the red option cards for this deck as well. 4 copies of Fireball and then the 2 copies of Hero of the Skies. I've seen some people run these in reverse where they opt for the 4 copies of the Hero of the Skies and only 2 copies of Fireball. This is of course because Fireball only gives you the card draw if your opponent doesn't have a 3000 lower Digimon on the board. What is nice about Fireball though is that it does take out some of those pesky floodgates who try to stop you from playing your Machine Dramons and getting the cost reduction, so that's always something to keep in mind. This deck also does take advantage of the card draw from the new promo Raremon card, allowing you to discard 1 card and then draw 2, and at a low cost of 4 on a level 4, it's not a bad option. And while I think the black variant of this deck runs anywhere from like 13 to 16 level 5 sideboard cards, this build, because it is so draw heavy and it is so focused on getting out either one of those cheap cost level 5s or just hard playing your Machine Dramon and getting the cost reduction off of it, we're going to see 20 copies of level 5s in this deck. And if you're like me and you've been playing the black variant of Machine Dramon and Chaos Dramon for a while now, definitely give this red variant a try, because you'll definitely learn playing this deck that there's more than one way to skin a cat. The next deck we're going to take a look at is going to be a Crossheart deck that won as part of a 3-man team for a large event that happened last week. What's really cool is if you've seen my video talking about the Pot of Greed problem that Digimon has, then you'll notice that this deck runs the 4 copies of Gravity Press and 4 copies of Blinding Ray that I talk about that have made some of the red and yellow decks so strong recently. Another big change for this deck is where I think that a lot of people recently have been going to Cross 7 to get a lot of damage off and to win games. This one has no Cross 7s to be found anywhere at all. Instead, it's relying on multiple copies of Shoutmon X5, as well as 2 copies of Mervamon. The idea here is to use these higher level Shoutmon cards, as well as the lower level Shoutmon cards, to give them rush, and then allow them to attack and get chip damage off in the early game. And then once your opponent has like 2 security left, you can use cards like the Gravity Press as well as Blinding Ray to gain a ton of memory over the course of that turn, and then hard play Mervamon for 8 while keeping your turn, pulling 2 Digimon out of the trash, and then attacking with all 3 of them to finish and close out the game. Again, while this strategy is incredibly potent, keep in mind that it does have its own counters in the fact that if your opponent somehow survives some of those swings, for example, you hit an option card and some of your Digimon get taken out, then you've pretty much lost the game, considering that Blinding Ray forces you to lose security to gain memory, and Gravity Press gives your opponent +2 memory at the end of your turn. So again, you're giving your opponent a ton of resources and taking away your own in hopes that you can close out the game using those cards. But if you're the kind of person who loves just all-out offense and these really heavily offensive decks, definitely give this one a shot. Oh yeah, one last thing, I want to shout out the really neat little tech here of the Hunter Shoutmon King version that's included in the deck here, allowing you to play the Taiki Tamer for free from your hand. Because this white tamer also counts as having Taiki in its name, you can play either the white tamer here or one of the 4 copies of the red Taiki Tamer that you normally see in Crossheart. Neat little tech to get those out really quickly and for really cheap as well. The last deck we're going to take a look at today is going to be what I dub like Shinebrid. It feels like it takes the Shine Greymon cards and their power and combines with some of the previous yellow hybrid stuff we've seen in the past. So I think we've seen a deck similar to this before, but I love that this one goes fully in on using Marcus to its full potential. You see all of the Marcus Tamers as well as all the yellow Tamers here. I love the inclusion of the BT13 Yugioh Greymon here for the double search. If you use Yugioh Greymon's effect to search your security for a Tamer and you pull a TK, then you can use TK's own play effect to also search security again to grab another card. And because all the cards in this deck are yellow, you can pretty much grab whatever you want. The idea here is pretty straightforward: to build up your Tamers and either attack with some of the hybrid cards from yellow that we see here, including things like the Jet Sylphimon, or you can go the route of playing these really cheap Agumon cards here who will allow you to make your Marcus Tamers become a Digimon and can attack, with the hope of having a Rise Greymon on the field. If you have a Rise Greymon here on the board, then what you can do is you can attack with that Marcus Tamer, and you don't care if it dies or not, because if it hits security and does get destroyed, the Rise Greymon's inheritance effect, and it's while it's in play as a level 5, lets you take that Marcus Tamer once per turn and put it on the top of your security, which means it's going to get recycled if your opponent checks it, and then you can attack again. Also, love the inclusion of the Dark Seraphimon here. I love this card, and anytime I get to see it in the deck, it's really cool to me. Being able to de-digivolve your opponent's Digimon whenever they attack your security is really cool, and on top of that, being able to get the actual recovery whenever it's destroyed makes this card really awkward to play around. And then it wouldn't be a yellow hybrid deck if it didn't have scary security options you did not want to check into. Things like the Shining Blast that can hit multiple Digimon at once, or things like the Final Shining Blast, which can hit a big Digimon for like 12k, all the while letting you play Marcus Tamers for free, as well as things like the Sunrise Buster, the Reinforced Memory Boost, and that yellow option that I have no chance of ever pronouncing correctly. This one, I think it's if you have 3 or more security, you can minus 12k from your opponent's Digimon, and if you have 3 or less security, you can take one of those Digimon and put it on the top of their security stack. Just a nice little bit of flexible removal here. And because this deck is built to go long, you always have that one nice in-hand finisher of the Dukemon by building up you and your opponent's trash over the course of the game and getting him out for free, and he has Rush. So if you're looking for a more defensive version or a more defensive variant of some of the Shine Greymon stuff, then definitely give this deck a try. And so that is going to just about do it for this week's Japanese Meta Report for the BT13 set over here in Asia. Keep in mind that next week we are going to have some results with those new starter deck cards, including some of the new ace cards introduced there. I had the chance to actually play against some of these decks the past weekend, and man, I gotta tell you, they are terrifying. And not only just the Garurumon based cards from the purple deck, which I think that out of the gate, most folks thought were gonna be pretty strong, but man, the black cards for things like Machine Dramon and Chaos Dramon, as well as the Agumon line cards, make both of those decks even scarier. That being said, I'm gonna get out of here. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.